I am Cassie Walker, 32 years old, and until recently just another data analyst burning the midnight oil at TechStream Solutions. For 6 months, I worked 70-hour weeks on our analytics integration project, surviving on coffee and the promise of a substantial bonus. Then my manager Brad took it all away with a smile. What he never realized was that in those thousands of lines of licensing agreements I had reviewed, I found something powerful. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on my backstabbing manager, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit subscribe if you love seeing corporate karma in action, and stick around to learn how reading the fine print saved my career. My journey at TechStream Solutions began 3 years ago when I joined fresh out of graduate school with my newly minted MBA in business analytics. I had always been the type to find patterns in chaos, which made data analytics a natural fit for my analytical mind. The company was expanding rapidly, breaking into new markets, and desperately needing people who could transform their growing mountain of customer data into actionable insights. I started as a junior analyst working under Brad Reynolds, a charismatic manager with a reputation for delivering projects on time. In those early days, Brad seemed like the perfect mentor. He had a way of simplifying complex concepts for the executive team and making our department look good. I admired how he navigated corporate politics with such ease, something I struggled with as someone who preferred spreadsheets to small talk. "You have potential, Cassie," he told me during my first performance review. "Focus on the technical skills, and I will help you navigate the corporate landscape." I believed him and threw myself into every project with enthusiasm. By my second year, I had been promoted to senior analyst. My models for predicting customer behavior had saved the marketing department millions of dollars, and I had developed a reputation as someone who could solve problems others could not. The executives knew my name, and I began receiving invitations to high-level meetings. Rachel Thompson, another analyst who had been with the company for 5 years, became my closest ally in the office. She was the first to warn me about Brad. "Be careful with how much you share with him," she said one day over lunch. "I have seen him take credit for other people's work before." I brushed off her concerns. "Brad has always acknowledged my contributions," I replied confidently. Rachel just shrugged. "Just document everything, that is all I am saying." I also got to know Diana Martinez from Human Resources during a company-wide training initiative. Diana seemed genuinely invested in employee well-being, and we occasionally had coffee together. She spoke about creating a more transparent compensation structure, but always carefully added that such changes take time in an organization of this size. Then there was Allison Park, our lead counsel. Most employees only interacted with her when there was a problem, but I found her fascinating. During company events, while others networked with sales or marketing, I would seek out Allison to learn about the legal side of our business. She seemed amused by my interest, but was always willing to explain the intricacies of contract law. "Most people run away when they see me coming," she joked once. "They think talking to legal means they are in trouble." "I find it interesting," I replied honestly, "the way agreements can shape business outcomes." She studied me curiously. That is a perspective I rarely hear from the analytics team. My relationship with our chief technology officer, Marcus Chen, was more distant but significant. He had praised my work on several occasions and seemed to genuinely appreciate my technical abilities. However, as a C-suite executive, he was removed from our day-to-day operations and relied heavily on Brad's assessments of the team. Everything changed when TechStream decided to overhaul our entire analytics infrastructure. The project was massive, involving the integration of cutting-edge third-party software that would give us capabilities our competitors could only dream about. The catch: the implementation was incredibly complex, and the licensing agreements were a labyrinth of technical requirements and legal obligations. "Cassie, I want you to lead the technical implementation," Brad announced in our team meeting. "You will work directly with the vendors team to ensure everything integrates properly with our existing systems." It was a huge responsibility, but also an incredible opportunity. What Brad did not mention was that, along with the technical work, I would become the de facto expert on the licensing requirements. The legal team was swamped with acquisition-related work, so Allison asked if I could flag any concerning terms in the agreements. "Just highlight anything that seems restrictive or unusual," she said, handing me a stack of documents 3 inches thick. "I will review whatever you flag." For weeks, I spent my days coding integration pathways, and my nights reading through dense legal jargon. I created detailed documentation of everything, partly because the project required it, and partly because Rachel's warning had planted a seed of caution. As the project progressed, I began noticing subtle changes in Brad's behavior. In meetings with senior leadership, he would present my work without mentioning my name. When I raised concerns about timeline constraints, he would override me with confident assurances that everything was on track. I started receiving late-night emails asking for detailed status reports that I suspected were being repurposed for his updates to the executive team. Despite these warning signs, I remained focused on the project. My team was counting on me, and I took pride in building something that would transform our company's capabilities. Besides, Brad had made me a promise during a one-on-one meeting that kept me motivated through the endless nights and working weekends. "This project is make or break for the department, Cassie," he said, leaning forward confidentially. "Marcus has authorized substantial bonuses for successful completion, and as the technical lead you will be looking at the biggest share. We are talking about a 5-figure sum that could really set you up nicely." The prospect of such a significant bonus was exhilarating. I had student loans that could be eliminated in one fell swoop. The validation of my hard work would be tangible, not just a pat on the back and a generic good job email. So I pushed harder, worked longer, and invested every ounce of my energy into making the analytics integration a success. When challenges arose, I solved them. When the vendor's team had questions, I answered them. I became the living repository of knowledge about every aspect of the system, from the technical architecture to the licensing requirements. What I did not realize was that by making myself indispensable to the project, I was creating the perfect opportunity for Brad to exploit my work. And that promised bonus would become the catalyst for a corporate showdown I never saw coming. After 6 grueling months, we finally launched the new analytics platform. The implementation was not just successful, it was practically seamless, a rarity for projects of this magnitude. Executives from every department sent congratulatory emails, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel the pure satisfaction of a job well done. The morning after the launch, Marcus stopped by our department, something he rarely did. "Extraordinary work," he said, addressing our team. "This will revolutionize how we understand our market position." His eyes landed on Brad. "Your leadership on this project has been exemplary." Brad beamed, accepting the praise without hesitation. "Thank you, sir. It was certainly a team effort." I waited for him to mention my role as the technical lead, but the moment never came. Instead, Brad smoothly transitioned into discussing the next phase of implementation, as if the success we were celebrating was primarily his achievement. Later that week, I received a company-wide email announcing a special presentation about the analytics platform for our board of directors. Brad was listed as the presenter, with no mention of other contributors. When I asked if he needed any technical support for the presentation, his response was dismissive. "I have got this covered, Cassie. Best to leave the high-level discussions to those who understand the strategic implications." That stung. I understood the strategic implications better than anyone because I had built the system from the ground up. Still, I tried to rationalize his behavior. Perhaps this was just how corporate politics worked, a game I had never been interested in playing. The real concerns began when I noticed my name being systematically removed from key documentation. The technical specifications I had written now listed analytics team as the author. The training materials I had developed overnight to meet a deadline suddenly had Brad's name on them. Even the implementation report I had drafted had been edited to minimize my contributions while emphasizing Brad's oversight and strategic direction. During a routine team meeting, Brad presented the post-implementation analysis. "As you can see from these metrics," he said, displaying a dashboard I had created, "my approach to the data integration has yielded significant performance improvements." My approach, I shifted uncomfortably in my seat, catching Rachel's sympathetic glance from across the table. After the meeting, she followed me to the break room. "You should say something," she urged. "He is taking credit for your entire project." I sighed, pouring myself a cup of coffee. What would that accomplish except making me look petty? The project was successful. That is what matters. "What matters," Rachel countered, "is that you are about to let him steal your bonus along with your credit." "What are you talking about?" Rachel lowered her voice. "I overheard him talking to Diana from HR. He is restructuring the bonus allocation for the project. From what I gathered, he is positioning himself for the lion's share, claiming he had to rescue the implementation from technical issues." "That is absurd," I protested. The implementation exceeded every benchmark. I know that, and you know that, Rachel said grimly. But the executives only know what Brad tells them. That conversation left me unsettled. The bonus Brad had promised had been a major motivation through those difficult months. Beyond the money itself, it represented recognition of my contribution, validation of my skills and dedication. The next day, I casually approached Brad about the timeline for bonus distribution, trying to appear merely curious rather than concerned. Bonuses. He barely looked up from his computer. Those are still being determined. There are a lot of factors to consider beyond just technical implementation. His dismissive tone sent a clear message my expectations needed to be managed. As I walked back to my desk, a cold realization settled in my stomach. Rachel had been right all along. That night I began a methodical review of everything related to the project. I gathered emails documenting my role, tracked down original versions of reports before Brad's edits, and compiled a timeline of my contributions. If nothing else, I would have a record of my work, even if no one else ever saw it. During this process, I revisited the licensing agreements for the analytics software. Something caught my attention that I had initially flagged but that had been dismissed as unimportant during our rushed implementation. Section 7.4.3 of the primary agreement contained an unusual clause. Licensee must maintain accurate records of all authorized operators of the licensed software and properly credit said operators in all internal and external communications regarding the licensed software's implementation and operation. Failure to maintain such records and provide appropriate attribution constitutes a material breach of this agreement. At the time, I had highlighted this for Allison, asking if we needed a formal crediting system. Brad had interjected that such requirements were standard boilerplate and never enforced. With the pressure of deadlines looming, the issue had been shelved. Now, reading it again with fresh eyes, I realized this obscure clause might be more significant than anyone had recognized. Our company was currently in violation of these terms, as Brad had systematically removed proper attribution from all documentation. According to this clause, that constituted a material breach, which could potentially invalidate our license to use the software, a system we had just spent millions implementing. I did not yet know how this information might help my situation, but instinctively I understood it was important. I carefully documented the clause and the specific instances where our company had failed to comply with its requirements. The promised bonus seemed increasingly unlikely, but perhaps there was another form of justice to be found in those dense pages of legal text that no one else had bothered to read carefully. What I did not yet realize was how this overlooked clause would soon upend the power dynamics that had left me feeling so helpless. As the quarterly review meeting approached, a subtle but noticeable shift occurred in our department's dynamic. Brad became increasingly controlling over information flow, insisting that all communications to other departments be channeled through him. Team meetings grew shorter and less collaborative, transforming into sessions where Brad simply distributed assignments without discussion. For me, this change manifested in increasingly menial tasks that seemed designed to distance me from the analytics platform I had built. "I need you to compile usage statistics," Brad would say, "or create a basic dashboard for the sales team." These were assignments that could have been handled by an intern, not someone with my expertise and experience. One afternoon, I was working late to finish a report when I overheard Brad on a call in the conference room door slightly ajar. "The implementation was challenging," he was saying, "but I managed to overcome the technical limitations we faced with the team I assembled." I recognized the voice on the speakerphone as Jennifer Watson, our Chief Financial Officer. "The board is extremely pleased with the results, Brad. Marcus speaks very highly of your leadership on this project." "I appreciate that," Brad replied, his voice oozing satisfaction. "I have always believed that proper technical oversight is the key to successful implementation." I stood frozen in the hallway, a printout clutched in my hand, as Brad continued to describe challenges he had never faced and solutions he had never developed. Every problem solved, every innovation implemented, had been my work or that of my team members. Yet he spoke of them as his personal achievements. The next day, I noticed Emily from marketing avoiding eye contact when we passed in the hall. Later, when I approached Jason from the business intelligence team about collaborating on a dashboard project, he seemed uncomfortable. "I think you should probably clear that with Brad first," he said. "He mentioned he wants to keep the analytics platform access centralized for now." Confused, I pressed for more information. Jason shifted awkwardly. Look, I do not want to get in the middle of anything. Brad told several department heads that there were some concerns about the implementation quality and that he is personally overseeing corrections. The implications were stunning. Brad was not just taking credit for my work, he was actively undermining my professional reputation. By suggesting that the implementation had problems requiring his intervention, he was creating a narrative that diminished my contribution while elevating his own. The stress began taking a physical toll. I started experiencing insomnia, lying awake, replaying conversations and meetings, searching for what I could have done differently. My confidence, once rock solid in my technical abilities, began to waver. If someone as experienced as Brad thought my work required correction, was it possible I had missed something significant? Rachel noticed the changes. "You look exhausted," she commented one morning, placing a coffee on my desk. "This is not worth sacrificing your health over." "I just do not understand why he is doing this," I admitted. "The project was successful. There is enough credit to go around." Rachel's expression was sympathetic, but unsurprised. Credit translates to promotions and bonuses. Brad is not interested in sharing either. The reality of her words hit home during my performance review the following week. I had prepared extensively, bringing documentation of my contributions to the analytics project and metrics showing the system's exceptional performance. Brad barely glanced at my materials. "While your technical skills are adequate," he began, sliding a form across the desk, "your understanding of business priorities needs improvement. I am giving you a 3 out of 5 for overall performance." I stared at the form in disbelief. 3 out of 5 was considered merely satisfactory, the corporate equivalent of a shrug. After the most successful project implementation in the company's recent history, after months of 70-hour weeks and flawless execution, my performance was being rated as average. "This does not reflect my contribution to the analytics platform," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. Brad leaned back in his chair. The platform implementation had numerous issues that required significant intervention. I have documented these concerns in my reports to upper management. It was a lie so blatant that for a moment I was speechless. What issues I finally managed. The system has exceeded every performance benchmark. Technical benchmarks are only one aspect of project success, Cassie. Your focus on metrics rather than business alignment is exactly the limitation I am referring to. His tone was patronizing, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. I left that meeting in a daze. The performance rating would impact not just my bonus but my career trajectory at the company. A pattern of 3s would eventually lead to performance improvement plans rather than promotions. Desperate for some intervention, I scheduled a meeting with Diana from HR, hoping her familiar face would offer some support. She listened sympathetically as I outlined the situation, nodding at appropriate intervals. "I understand your frustration," she said when I finished. "Performance reviews can sometimes feel subjective." "This is not about feeling," I insisted. "I can prove that my contributions to the analytics platform were substantial and that the implementation was successful." Diana smiled in that practiced way HR professionals have perfected. Performance is about more than just technical contribution. Brad has been with the company for 8 years and has a strong track record of evaluating talent. She slid a folder across the desk. "Here are some resources on accepting constructive feedback that many employees find helpful." I left that meeting, understanding that HR was not a resource for me, but a system designed to protect management. Diana's sympathetic expression had masked a complete unwillingness to challenge Brad's authority or examine the facts of the situation. The final blow came when company-wide emails announced organizational changes. Brad had been promoted to Senior Director of Analytics Strategy, a new position created to leverage the success of our recent analytics implementation. The announcement included effusive praise for his visionary leadership and technical ingenuity. That same day, Rachel stopped by my desk, her expression grim. "You should know that performance bonuses were distributed this morning. Several team members received them, including people who barely worked on the analytics project." "And me?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Your name was not on the list." The injustice was staggering. Not only had Brad stolen credit for my work, used it to secure a promotion, and damaged my professional standing, but he had also redirected the financial compensation I had earned to others likely to secure their loyalty and silence. I walked to the bathroom and locked myself in a stall, pressing my forehead against the cool metal partition. For the first time since this ordeal began, I allowed myself to cry silent tears of frustration and betrayal. Everything I had worked for all those late nights and sacrificed weekends had amounted to nothing but advancement for someone else. When I returned to my desk, I opened my computer and began updating my resume. Perhaps it was time to accept that there was no winning against someone like Brad who played a game with rules I had never bothered to learn. But as I typed, a notification popped up, reminding me of the licensing review. I had scheduled a routine check to ensure our analytics platform was compliant with all technical requirements. And suddenly, I remembered Section 7.4.3 of the licensing agreement, the clause about proper attribution that had been dismissed as unimportant. I pulled up the document and read it again more carefully, this time understanding dawning as I processed the implications. Our company was in clear violation of these terms, and the potential consequences were severe. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the rules of Brad's game were not the only ones that mattered. The morning of the bonus distribution, I arrived at work with a knot in my stomach. Despite the mounting evidence that Brad had no intention of recognizing my contribution, some small part of me still hoped that professional ethics would prevail. I had, after all, been the technical lead on a project that was now being celebrated as a major company achievement. I found a meeting request from Brad on my calendar for 10:30 a.m. The subject simply read, "Compensation Review." This was it then, the moment of truth. I spent the intervening hours trying to focus on routine tasks while my mind raced through possible scenarios. Perhaps Rachel's information had been incorrect. Perhaps Brad had set aside a separate bonus for me, recognizing my unique contribution. Perhaps there had been budget constraints that were now resolved. These hopeful fantasies dissolved the moment I entered Brad's office. His expression was a practiced mask of corporate sympathy, the kind reserved for delivering unwelcome news while absolving oneself of responsibility. "Cassie, thank you for coming in. Please have a seat." He gestured to the chair across from his desk, with a magnanimous wave, as if granting an audience. I sat, hands folded in my lap, to stop them from shaking, not from nervousness, but from the anger already building inside me. "I wanted to discuss your compensation situation personally." Brad began, his voice modulated to convey sincerity. "As you know, the analytics implementation has been deemed a success, and the company has allocated bonus funds to recognize key contributors." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "After careful consideration of individual contributions and alignment with strategic objectives, I have had to make some difficult decisions regarding bonus distribution." He paused, perhaps expecting me to fill the silence, but I maintained my composure. Brad cleared his throat. "Unfortunately, I am not able to approve a bonus for you at this time." Even though I had anticipated this outcome, hearing the words spoken aloud sent a wave of disbelief through me. May I ask why I managed my voice steadier than I felt? "No bonus for you this year, policy reasons," Brad said with a dismissive flick of his hand, as if the matter was trivial. "The technical implementation, while functional, required significant oversight and correction. Additionally, your performance review indicated areas needing improvement." The casual way he delivered this devastating news, the complete absence of recognition for months of extraordinary effort, ignited something in me. But years of professional conditioning kept my expression neutral. "I see," I said quietly. "Is there documentation of these technical issues that required correction? I would like to review them for professional development purposes." Brad's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Those assessments are part of confidential management reports. What matters now is focusing on your current projects and addressing the performance concerns I outlined in your review." In that moment, looking at Brad's practiced expression of corporate concern, I understood with perfect clarity that he had planned this from the beginning. The performance review, the rumors of implementation problems, the systematic removal of my name from documentation, all of it had been orchestrated to justify denying me recognition and compensation while he reaped the rewards of my work. "Thank you for the clarification," I said, rising from my chair. "I appreciate your time." Brad seemed slightly surprised by my calm acceptance. "I am glad you understand, Cassie. This is simply business, nothing personal." Nothing personal. As if stripping away the fruits of my labor after months of sacrifice was somehow divorced from personal impact. As if the mortgage payment I had hoped to make with that bonus was just an abstract concept. I nodded and left his office, my mind strangely quiet. The shock and anger were still there, but beneath them was something new, a cold clarity of purpose I had never experienced before. At my desk, I sat motionless, staring at my computer screen without seeing it. Rachel approached cautiously. "It happened, did not it?" she asked softly. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "That complete jerk," she whispered fiercely. "After everything you did for this project." "It is fine," I said, surprising myself, with the steadiness in my voice. "Really, at Island?" Rachel looked skeptical. "You do not have to pretend with me. I know how much you were counting on that bonus." A tear escaped despite my efforts, and I quickly wiped it away. "I am not pretending. I just need some time to think." Rachel squeezed my shoulder. "Whatever you need, I am here." She hesitated. "You know you could go over his head." Marcus seemed impressed with the implementation. "Maybe if he knew the truth." I shook my head. "Brad has been managing the narrative for months. It would be my word against his, and he has already documented his version in official reports." After Rachel left, I sat at my desk, fighting back tears of frustration and betrayal. Years of education, months of relentless work, all that sacrifice of personal time and well-being, and for what? To watch someone else take the credit and compensation while I received nothing but a patronizing lecture about policy reasons. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the notebook where I had documented the licensing issues I had discovered. Flipping through the pages, I reviewed the notes I had made about Section 7.4.3, the attribution requirement that our company was currently violating. The clause was clear: failure to maintain proper records of system operators and provide appropriate attribution constituted a material breach of the agreement. Such a breach could potentially invalidate our license to use the software, rendering our multi-million-dollar investment worthless and exposing the company to significant legal liability. I had raised this issue during implementation, but Brad had dismissed it. Now I understood why. Proper attribution would have created a paper trail of my contributions, making it harder for him to minimize my role. As I reviewed the documentation, an idea began to form. I would not confront Brad directly or plead my case to executives who had already accepted his version of events. Instead, I would simply bring an important compliance issue to the attention of the appropriate department, as any responsible employee would do. Opening my email, I began composing a message to Allison Park in the legal department. The subject line read, "Potential Compliance Issue Analytics Platform Licensing Agreement." The body of the email was carefully worded, professional and objective. Allison. During a routine review of our analytics platform licensing documentation, I noticed a potential compliance issue regarding Section 7.4.3 of the Master Agreement. This section requires proper attribution and record-keeping for all authorized system operators. Current documentation does not appear to meet these requirements, which the agreement defines as a material breach. Given the significant investment in this platform, I wanted to bring this to your attention promptly. I am available to discuss the technical details at your convenience. Regards, Cassie Walker, Senior Data Analyst. My finger hovered over the send button as I considered the potential consequences. This email could set in motion events I could not control. Brad would undoubtedly realize I was behind it and might retaliate further. I might be labeled a troublemaker or not a team player. But the alternative was to accept the injustice, to allow Brad to continue exploiting my work while I received nothing but criticism and diminished career prospects. That was not an option I could live with. I clicked send, watching the email disappear into the corporate ether, a small act of self-advocacy that might change nothing or everything. Either way, for the first time in months, I felt a sense of agency returning. 15 minutes later, a new meeting appeared on my calendar, urgent licensing compliance discussion, with Allison Park scheduled for 2 p.m. that same day. The wheels had been set in motion, and there was no turning back now. The 2 hours between sending my email and meeting with Allison were among the longest of my professional life. I alternated between reviewing the licensing documents to ensure my understanding was correct and second-guessing my decision to raise the issue. Had I just committed career suicide? Would this be dismissed as the petty action of a disgruntled employee? At 1:45, I gathered my documentation and headed to the legal department on the 22nd floor. Unlike our open plan analytics department, legal occupied a suite of private offices with frosted glass doors projecting an air of confidentiality and importance. Allison's assistant, A meticulous man named Gregory greeted me with professional courtesy. "Miss Park is on a call, but will be with you shortly. Can I offer you water or coffee?" "Water would be great, thank you," I replied, my mouth suddenly dry with anxiety. As I waited, I observed the legal department's quiet efficiency. Here, away from the political battleground of middle management, people moved with purpose and clarity. There were no games, just the straightforward application of expertise to protect the company's interests. At precisely 2 p.m., Gregory escorted me into Allison's office. She rose from behind an imposing desk to greet me, her expression serious but not unfriendly. "Cassie, thank you for bringing this matter to my attention. Please have a seat and walk me through your concerns." I placed my documentation on her desk and began explaining in precise technical terms. Section 7.4.3 of the Master Licensing Agreement contains a specific requirement for attribution and record-keeping of all authorized operators of the analytics platform. Allison nodded, following along in her copy of the agreement. "Go on." "The clause states that failure to maintain such records and provide appropriate attribution constitutes a material breach. Currently, our company is not maintaining accurate records of who implemented and operates the system. In fact, documentation has been systematically altered to remove attribution." Allison's expression sharpened. "Altered? That is a serious claim. Do you have evidence of this?" I slid across the original technical specifications, with my name listed as author, followed by the revised version distributed to the executive team that credited only analytics team under Brad's direction. These are just examples. I have documented 17 instances where attribution was removed or changed in official company records relating to the analytics platform. Allison studied the documents carefully, her lawyer's mind clearly processing the implications, and you were directly involved in the implementation. I was the technical lead for the entire project. I personally configured the integration points, established the data architecture, and created the implementation protocols. I also trained other team members on system operation. Yet none of this is reflected in current documentation. Number. Over the past several months, my name has been systematically removed from all official records related to the platform. Allison leaned back in her chair, her expression grave. "This is potentially quite serious. A material breach of the licensing agreement could invalidate our right to use the software. Given our investment and operational dependency, that would be problematic." That was an understatement. The company had spent millions on licensing and implementation. Departments across the organization now relied on the platform for critical business intelligence. Losing access would be catastrophic. "I would like to schedule a meeting with the relevant parties to address this immediately," Allison said, reaching for her phone. "In the meantime, can you provide me with a complete list of everyone who should be credited as an operator under the terms of the agreement?" Of course. I maintained my own records throughout the implementation. I handed her a folder containing the detailed documentation I had compiled, including names, roles, and specific contributions. Allison raised an eyebrow. "Very thorough." "I believe in proper documentation," I replied simply. By late afternoon, Allison had coordinated an emergency meeting for the following morning with key stakeholders herself, Brad Marcus, our CTO, and me. The meeting request subject line, "Critical licensing compliance issue," ensured that no one would decline. That evening, as I prepared for the confrontation ahead, I received a text from Rachel Hurd about tomorrow's meeting. "Brad is on the warpath. Be careful." I replied with more confidence than I felt truth is on my side. The next morning, I arrived early to the executive conference room, choosing a seat that would allow me to observe everyone's reactions. Allison arrived next, nodding to me professionally as she arranged her materials at the head of the table. Marcus entered, looking concerned, the expression of an executive who has just been informed of an unexpected problem. "Allison, what is this about a compliance issue? We cannot afford any disruption to the analytics platform." "I will explain everything once Brad joins us," she replied diplomatically. When Brad finally strode in, he faltered momentarily upon seeing me, clearly not having anticipated my presence. He quickly recovered, assuming his usual confident demeanor as he took a seat across from me. "Thank you all for making time for this urgent matter," Allison began. "Yesterday it was brought to my attention that we may be in violation of a key provision in our analytics platform licensing agreement." She distributed copies of Section 7.4.3, highlighting the attribution requirements. This clause mandates proper documentation and credit for all authorized operators of the system. Failure to comply constitutes a material breach that could invalidate our license. Marcus frowned. I do not understand. How are we in violation? Allison turned to me. Cassie, as you raised this concern, perhaps you could explain. All eyes turned to me. Brad's glare was particularly intense, but I focused on maintaining my professional composure. During implementation, I maintained detailed records of everyone involved in configuring and operating the system as required by the agreement. However, in official company documentation, this information has been altered. Most references to my role as technical lead have been removed, and attribution has been centralized under a single manager rather than accurately reflecting the team's contributions. Brad's face flushed. That is absurd. Documentation was streamlined for clarity, not to remove attribution. Allison calmly placed two documents side by side. These appear to be different versions of the same technical specification. The original clearly lists Cassie as the author and technical lead. The version distributed to the executive team does not mention her at all. Marcus looked troubled. Brad, was Cassie involved in the implementation? She assisted with some technical aspects under my direction, Brad said dismissively. But I oversaw the entire project and was ultimately responsible for its success. I could not let this distortion stand. I led the technical implementation from start to finish. I personally wrote the integration code, designed the data architecture, and trained the team on system operation. I can demonstrate my role through email records, meeting notes, and the technical documentation I created throughout the process. This sounds like a disgruntled employee trying to claim more credit than she deserves, Brad countered. Cassie received an average performance review and is clearly retaliating. Allison raised a hand to interrupt what was becoming a heated exchange. The performance review is not relevant to our current discussion. What matters is compliance with the licensing agreement. Based on my review of the documentation Cassie provided, there appears to be a legitimate concern. She turned to Brad. Were you aware of this attribution requirement in the licensing agreement? Brad shifted uncomfortably. Those agreements contain hundreds of clauses. It is impossible to track every minor detail. This is not a minor detail, Allison corrected. It is defined as a material term breach of which could invalidate our entire license. The vendor could potentially shut down our access to the platform and seek damages for non-compliance. Marcus looked alarmed. That would be catastrophic. We have integrated this platform into every aspect of our operations. Precisely, Allison agreed, which is why we need to address this immediately. Brad attempted to regain control of the narrative. Even if this clause exists, I am sure the vendor would not enforce such a technicality. We could negotiate. Actually, I interjected. I spoke with our vendor contact this morning to verify my understanding of the requirement. They confirmed that attribution is a core principle of their licensing structure, and that they have previously enforced this clause with other clients. Brad glared at me. You contacted the vendor without authorization. That is a violation of communication protocols. As the technical lead documented in the original implementation plan, I am an authorized point of contact, I replied calmly. I did not discuss our specific situation, only sought clarification on the general requirement. Allison nodded approvingly at my caution before addressing the room. Regardless of how we proceed, we need to understand how this happened. Brad, Cassie claims she flagged this requirement during implementation. Is that accurate? Brad's confidence wavered. She may have mentioned something about attribution, but it did not seem significant at the time. I have the email, I said, quietly sliding a printout across the table. Dated 4 months ago, highlighting this specific clause and asking for guidance on compliance. The response dismisses it as standard boilerplate that we do not need to worry about. Marcus took the email, reading it with a deepening frown. This should have been escalated to legal immediately. Yes, it should have, Allison agreed, her expression hardening as she turned to Brad. Instead, it appears that not only was the requirement ignored, but documentation was subsequently altered in a way that directly violated the clause. I made editorial decisions to streamline reports for executive consumption, Brad insisted. There was no intentional violation. Intent is irrelevant from a compliance perspective, Allison stated flatly. We are currently in breach of a material term, and we need to remedy the situation immediately. The meeting continued for another hour, with Allison outlining a remediation plan that would bring us back into compliance with the licensing agreement. The plan included updating all documentation to accurately reflect the roles and contributions of everyone involved in the implementation, with particular emphasis on restoring my attribution as technical lead. As the meeting concluded, Marcus asked to speak with me privately. Brad attempted to include himself, but Marcus firmly stated, "Just Cassie, please." Once alone, Marcus studied me with new interest. "I had no idea you were so central to the implementation." Every report I received indicated that Brad was leading the technical aspects, as well as the management. "That was not accurate, sir," I replied simply. "So it seems." He paused, considering his next words carefully. "Why did not you come forward sooner about your role being minimized?" It was a fair question, one I had asked myself repeatedly. I believed the work would speak for itself. I was focused on making the project successful, not on who received credit. "And the bonus situation? Were you aware that Brad redistributed what would have been your share?" So Rachel's information had been correct. I was informed this morning that I would not receive a bonus due to policy reasons and performance concerns. Marcus's expression darkened. "I see. That island. Troubling." He made a note on his tablet. "Thank you for bringing the licensing issue to our attention, Cassie. It was the right thing to do, though. I suspect, not an easy decision." "The company's interests had to come first," I said, which was true even if it was not my only motivation. As I left the executive floor, I felt lighter than I had in months. The truth was finally emerging, and while the outcome remained uncertain, at least now I was playing a game with rules I understood. The following morning, another meeting request appeared on my calendar: Executive Review Analytics, Platform Attribution and Compliance. The attendee list had expanded to include Jennifer Watson, our CFO, and Robert Taylor, the CEO. The meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. in the main boardroom, a clear indication of how seriously the issue was being taken. Brad was noticeably absent from the office that morning. According to Rachel, he had been in back-to-back meetings with HR and the executive team since 8 a.m. "Something big is happening," she whispered during our coffee break. "Diana from HR looks like she is handling radioactive material whenever anyone mentions analytics or licensing." I maintained a professional demeanor throughout the day, focusing on my regular tasks and avoiding speculation with colleagues. Inside, however, I was a storm of emotions oscillating between vindication and anxiety about the upcoming meeting. At 2:55, I gathered my materials and headed to the boardroom on the executive floor. The space was intimidating by design, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline, and a massive table of polished walnut that could seat 20 people. Portraits of company founders and past CEOs lined the walls, their stern expressions seeming to evaluate everyone who entered. I was the last to arrive. Already seated were Marcus, Allison, Jennifer, Robert, and Brad. Diana from HR was also present, sitting slightly apart with a folder of documents. Brad avoided eye contact as I took my seat, his usual confidence replaced by a tense, defensive posture. Robert Taylor, our CEO, opened the meeting with characteristic directness. "I understand we have a serious compliance issue with our analytics platform licensing. Allison, please bring everyone up to speed." Allison provided a succinct overview of the situation: the attribution requirement in the licensing agreement, the systematic removal of proper credit from documentation, and the potential consequences of this material breach. To be clear, Jennifer interjected, "What is our financial exposure here?" "Worst-case scenario: invalidation of our $3 million license, potential damages for breach of contract, and the operational impact of losing access to the platform, which would affect every department," Allison replied. "Additionally, there would be costs associated with finding and implementing an alternative solution, likely under time pressure." Robert's expression was grave. "And how did we miss this requirement during implementation?" All eyes turned to Brad, who shifted uncomfortably. "The licensing agreement is hundreds of pages of technical and legal jargon. This particular clause seemed routine, not something that would be strictly enforced." "It was explicitly flagged during implementation," Marcus countered, sliding forward the email I had provided, by Cassie, who was apparently leading the technical aspects of the project despite reports indicating otherwise. Robert turned to me. "Miss Walker, is that accurate? You led the technical implementation?" "Yes, sir. I responded, maintaining a professional tone. I was responsible for the system architecture, integration points, and training of operators. I also reviewed the licensing agreements and flagged this particular requirement among others. Yet none of the reports I received mentioned your role, Robert noted. In fact, every presentation and document attributed the technical leadership to Mr. Reynolds. Brad attempted to interject, but Robert silenced him with a raised hand. I want to hear from Miss Walker first. I took a deep breath. Over time, my name was removed from documentation related to the project. Reports I authored began to appear under Analytics Team, or with Mr. Reynolds listed as the author. When I raised concerns, I was told it was for clarity and consistency in executive communications. Diana from HR spoke up. Mr. Reynolds also gave Miss Walker a mediocre performance review despite what appears to be exceptional work on this project, and denied her the performance bonus that had been allocated for the technical lead. This was news to me. So there had been a specific bonus allocated for my role, one that Brad had diverted elsewhere. Allison set down the papers she had been reviewing, her expression serious. She looked directly at Brad and said in a quiet but clear voice, "This goes beyond documentation issues. This appears to be deliberate misrepresentation, with financial implications." The room fell silent as the weight of her words settled over the gathering. Brad's face had gone pale. Robert turned to Marcus. As CTO, what is your assessment of the situation? Marcus did not hesitate. Based on the evidence presented, it appears Miss Walker was indeed the technical lead for this implementation and deserves to be credited as such. More concerning is the apparent effort to obscure her role and redistribute compensation that should have been directed to her. I made decisions based on overall team dynamics and long-term strategic considerations, Brad protested. Performance bonuses are discretionary. Not when they have been specifically allocated for particular roles and achievements, Jennifer countered. The budget approved by the Finance Committee included a substantial bonus for the technical lead of the analytics implementation, which by all accounts should have been Miss Walker. Brad was cornered, and his response revealed his true character. Cassie is using this minor licensing technicality to undermine my authority because she is disappointed about a bonus. This is nothing but a disgruntled employee trying to damage the company out of spite. The accusation hung in the air for a moment before Robert addressed me directly. Miss Walker, is that your intention? To damage the company? I met his gaze steadily. No, sir. If that were my goal, I would have reported the violation directly to the vendor, or simply resigned and left the company exposed. Instead, I brought it to our legal department so it could be addressed internally, protecting the company's interests while ensuring proper attribution as required by the agreement. Robert nodded thoughtfully. A fair point. He turned to Allison. What do you recommend as our next steps? We need to immediately update all documentation to properly attribute roles and contributions, particularly Miss Walker's as technical lead. We should also conduct a thorough review of all licensing agreements to ensure there are no other overlooked requirements. Finally, we need to address the internal issues that allowed this situation to develop. Robert considered her words. Agreed on all counts. He turned to Marcus. I want you to personally oversee the documentation updates and licensing review. Work directly with Miss Walker to ensure everything is accurate. Of course, Marcus agreed. Diana. Robert continued. Please prepare a full review of the bonus allocation process for the analytics project, with particular attention to the funds earmarked for the technical lead role. Diana nodded, making notes in her folder. And Mr. Reynolds, Robert said, his tone noticeably cooler, you and I will have a separate discussion about management practices and reporting accuracy immediately following this meeting. Brad's expression was a mixture of disbelief and dawning realization that his carefully constructed narrative was collapsing. Before we conclude, Robert said, I want to address one more thing. He turned to me. Miss Walker, I apologize on behalf of the company for this situation. Your contribution should have been recognized and rewarded appropriately. I would like to meet with you tomorrow to discuss how we can rectify this oversight. The meeting adjourned, and as people gathered their materials, Marcus approached me. Do you have a moment? He asked, gesturing toward a smaller conference room across the hall. Once we were alone, he closed the door and turned to me with an expression of genuine respect. I owe you an apology, Cassie. I relied on Brad's assessments without verifying them, and as a result, failed to recognize your true contribution to this project. Thank you for acknowledging that, I replied, surprised by his candor. I would like to understand something, he continued. Given your expertise and the quality of your work, why did you stay in a situation where your contributions were being minimized? It was a question I had asked myself many times over the past months. I believed in the project, I answered honestly. I wanted to see it succeed regardless of who received the credit, and perhaps I underestimated how important proper attribution would become both professionally and financially. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. A lesson for us both, then. He paused. The CTO's office is creating a new division focused on advanced analytics implementation. We need someone with both technical expertise and a thorough understanding of compliance requirements to lead it. Would that interest you? The offer was unexpected and thrilling, a complete reversal of the career trajectory Brad had been pushing me toward. Yes, I replied, trying to maintain my composure. That would interest me very much. Good. We will discuss details tomorrow in your meeting with Robert. He extended his hand. In the meantime, thank you for your integrity in bringing this issue forward. It could have caused significant damage if left unaddressed. As I shook his hand, I realized that this moment represented not just professional vindication, but a fundamental shift in how I viewed my own value and the importance of standing up for it, even when doing so was uncomfortable or risky. Walking back to my desk, I passed Brad's office. Through the glass wall, I could see him sitting alone, staring at his computer with an expression of stunned disbelief. Our eyes met briefly, and in that moment, I felt no triumph or satisfaction, only a quiet certainty that justice had finally prevailed. The weeks following that pivotal meeting brought a series of transformative changes both to the company and to my professional life. True to his word, Robert met with me the next day to discuss rectifying the situation. The conversation was direct and productive, resulting in 3 immediate outcomes. First, I received official recognition as the technical lead for the analytics implementation. All documentation was updated to accurately reflect my role and contributions, bringing us back into compliance with the licensing agreement and preserving our investment in the platform. Second, the bonus that had been allocated for the technical lead was processed immediately, along with additional compensation for the licensing expertise that had ultimately protected the company from a potentially costly breach of contract. Third, I was offered the position Marcus had mentioned, Director of Advanced Analytics Implementation, a new role reporting directly to the CTO, with both technical and compliance oversight responsibilities. The promotion included a substantial salary increase and a seat at the technology leadership table, where decisions about future investments and strategies were made. Brad faced consequences commensurate with his actions. While the company did not publicly disclose the details, it became known that he had been removed from his management position and reassigned to a non-leadership role in a different department. The silent message was clear: taking credit for others' work and manipulating compensation would not be tolerated. In the aftermath, I found myself navigating a complex mix of emotions. There was vindication, certainly, but also a lingering sense of betrayal that took time to process. I had trusted Brad as a manager and mentor only to discover that he viewed my success as a threat rather than a reflection of his leadership. Rachel was the first to celebrate my promotion, organizing an after-work gathering that helped ease the transition from team member to director. "I knew you would land on your feet," she said, raising her glass in a toast. "Though I have to admit I did not expect you to land quite so spectacularly." I laughed, feeling genuinely lighthearted for the first time in months. Neither did I. I just wanted fair recognition and the bonus I had earned. And instead you got an executive track position and exposed a manipulative manager. Not bad for someone who just wanted to do good work and go home. Her words captured the unexpected nature of my journey. I had never sought power or political advantage yet by standing up for myself. I had achieved more than I would have by simply accepting the injustice. Diana from HR approached me a week after the resolution, requesting a private conversation. "I want to apologize," she said, once we were alone. "When you came to me about your concerns, I dismissed them as typical performance review disappointment. I should have looked more closely at the discrepancy between your contributions and your evaluation." Her apology was unexpected, but appreciated. "Thank you for acknowledging that," I replied. It would have made a difference to have HR as an advocate earlier in the process. The experience has prompted a review of our performance evaluation procedures, she explained. We are implementing new checks and balances to prevent similar situations in the future. This systemic change was perhaps the most satisfying outcome, the knowledge that my experience might prevent others from facing the same injustice. Allison became both a colleague and mentor as we worked together to strengthen compliance processes around our technology implementations. You have a natural talent for translating between technical and legal frameworks, she observed during one of our working sessions. It is a rare skill set that serves the company well. I never imagined that reading through all those licensing agreements would turn out to be so valuable, I admitted. Most people see legal documents as obstacles to be overcome or ignored, she replied with a knowing smile. You saw them as important information even when others dismissed their significance. That perspective saved this company millions of dollars and protected your colleagues' jobs. Her framing helped me see my actions not just as self-advocacy, but as service to the larger organization and its people. The most challenging conversation came 2 months after the resolution, when Brad requested a meeting. I hesitated, but ultimately agreed, curious about what he might have to say. I want to apologize for my actions, he began, his usual confidence notably absent. What I did was wrong, taking credit for your work and denying you the recognition and compensation you deserved. I studied him, trying to determine if the apology was genuine or simply damage control. Thank you for acknowledging that, I said cautiously. The past few months have given me time to reflect on my leadership approach, he continued. I convinced myself that centralizing credit was more effective for communicating with executives, but the truth is, I was insecure about my own contributions and saw your expertise as threatening rather than valuable. His candor was surprising and somewhat disarming. I never wanted to threaten your position, I told him. I just wanted to do good work and be acknowledged for it. I know that now, he nodded, and I am facing the consequences of not recognizing it sooner. We did not become friends, but that conversation helped me release some of the resentment I had been carrying, allowing me to focus fully on my new role and the opportunities it presented. The healing process was gradual but steady. Each successful project under my leadership rebuilt a piece of the confidence that had been eroded during those difficult months. Each acknowledgement of my expertise helped restore my professional identity, and each time I ensured that team members received proper credit for their contributions, I reaffirmed the values I wanted to embody as a leader. My new position allowed me to implement changes that fostered both innovation and recognition. We established clear attribution protocols for all technical implementations, ensuring that contributions were documented and acknowledged regardless of hierarchy. We created transparent criteria for performance evaluations and bonus allocations, reducing the potential for subjective or biased decisions. These structural improvements were important, but the personal growth was equally significant. I learned to advocate for myself without apology, to document my contributions as a matter of routine rather than defensive necessity, and to trust my expertise even when others questioned it. Perhaps most importantly, I discovered that standing up for oneself does not require becoming bitter or cynical. I could protect my interests and demand fair treatment while maintaining integrity and professionalism. The process was not about revenge but about restoration, not about punishing Brad but about preserving my own value and dignity. A year after the licensing clause incident, I was invited to speak at our annual technology conference about the importance of compliance in system implementation. Looking out at the audience of colleagues and industry peers, I shared not just technical insights but also the broader lesson of my experience. The fine print matters, I concluded, not just in licensing agreements but in how we value ourselves and our contributions. Sometimes the most important clause to enforce is the one that ensures we receive the recognition we have earned through our work and dedication. The standing ovation that followed was a powerful reminder of how far I had come from those dark days of doubt and diminishment. In the quiet moments of reflection, I often think about the paradoxical nature of my journey. By focusing exclusively on the work itself, I had made myself vulnerable to exploitation. Yet it was my deep understanding of that work down to the details of licensing clauses that others ignored that ultimately provided the leverage to reclaim my professional standing. The experience taught me that true success requires both excellence in your craft and the courage to ensure that excellence is recognized and rewarded. It is not enough to do great work if you allow others to minimize or misappropriate it. Self-advocacy is not vanity or selfishness, but an essential aspect of professional integrity. For those of you watching who might be facing similar situations, remember that your work has value, and you deserve proper credit for your contributions. Document your achievements, understand the rules of your environment, and when necessary, find the leverage to ensure fair treatment. You can do this without becoming the office politician you may disdain, without sacrificing your principles or authenticity. And sometimes justice comes not from confrontation, but from simply bringing the truth into the light and letting it speak for itself. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a professional setting? What strategies worked for you? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more insights on navigating workplace challenges with integrity. And if you know someone who might benefit from this message about self-advocacy and professional worth, share this video with them. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, always read the fine print, especially when it comes to valuing your own contributions.